challenges posed by the vacuum in Palestinian political leadership is the topic of today's lecture. This is a timely topic indeed for everyone involved in Palestinian affairs because, as Nadia Hijab notes, the Palestinian national movement is experiencing serious fragmentation and paralysis. Some are uniting under the call and actions for BDS, and students and civil society organizations continue to mobilize. Nevertheless, between the multiple visions and policies of actors such as the PA, Hamas, aid and development organizations, destructive Israeli policies, and U.S. inaction, there are many factors that have had profound ramifications on the forms and viability of political leadership among the Palestinians. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Nadia Hijab. She's an old friend and a former executive director of the Jerusalem Fund. So welcome back. She's also a much respected colleague who analyzes so many different aspects of Arab affairs and especially policies about Palestine and the Palestinians. Currently, Nadia Hijab is the Executive Director of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, which is a global think tank established in 2009 to put a stronger Palestinian policy voice on the map. She has co-founded or participated in several campaigns for Palestinian human rights in the United States, including the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation. She was one of the co-founders. She's also a senior fellow at the Institute for Palestine Studies. Nadia Hijab's first book, which was titled Woman Power, The Arab Debate on Women at Work, was published by Cambridge University Press. She also co-authored Citizens Apart, A Portrait of the Palestinians in Israel, which was published by IB Tauris. She's held senior positions at the United Nations, including the UN Development Program, among other assignments there. So please help me in welcoming Nadia Hijab.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zena, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to be back at the Palestine Center and the Jerusalem Fund. And to speak to you at what is a really pivotal time in our movement for Palestinian freedom. Am I coming through clearly? Can you all hear me? Okay, a bit more loudly. Okay, okay. So. Well, as everybody knows, the Israeli elections have dominated the news cycle in the U.S. For days. It's almost as though the whole world was focused on Palestine, Israel for the past few weeks. And in a way it was, because the Europeans, the U.S., the Palestine Liberation Organization, and the Palestine Authority were all desperately hoping that the Labour Party in Israel would win, would come out ahead at least, so that they could revive the peace process. Their disappointment must be huge. I mean, although the Labour Party did much better than expected, or much better than it had before, Netanyahu has come out ahead with 30 seats, or 30 mandates in the Knesset. And the largely Arab joint list also performed very well, but still, it's not yet in a position to shake the boat very much, and Netanyahu looks to be in line to form the next Israeli government. Ironically, a Netanyahu government makes the job of Palestinian civil society easier. Although, of course, it makes the job of the PLO and PA and the US and Europe much harder. And it's going to make the lives of the Palestinians on the ground much, much harder. Let's think about it. If Labour had been in position to form the next government, Palestinian civil society and the international solidarity movement would have faced a real challenge. We would have had to work very, very hard to prevent a deal that would inevitably undermine Palestinian rights. Because of the weakness and disarray of the Palestinian leadership, all that we could have expected or hoped from such a deal would be effectively maybe a bit more autonomy than what exists now, but no sovereignty of any kind. Actually, the Palestinian scholar Camille Mansour wrote a paper for Al-Shabaka several years ago where he showed that the maximum Israel position and the minimum Palestinian position, there was still a huge gap on sovereignty. So, I mean, that's worth going back to and reading. Things haven't changed. I mean, certainly, if they've changed, they've got much worse. So there would have been a bit more autonomy, a truncated state, and no right of return from any best case outcome had there been a labor leadership. As it is, with Netanyahu's win of 30 seats compared to Labor's 24, Israel's racism and colonialism is now on full display. And the settler and army attacks on Palestinians under occupation in the West Bank and the army attacks on Gaza will rise. And maybe even these attacks will rise on Palestinian citizens of Israel. So now the Europeans, the US, and the PLO and the PA are going to have to take much more forceful action than they've been doing, or indeed than they've been wanting to, against the settlements. We have a gap between the Democrats and Republicans now over Israel, which is likely to grow, providing potential opportunity for civil society activism. And the PLO-PA will have to make much more forceful use of the international instruments that they have signed. Obviously, there's no time for complacency at all. It's not a good scene in any way. And the Palestinian movement, the Palestinian people and the international solidarity movement face many, many challenges. Israel is becoming increasingly ferocious as it moves inexorably to the right. As I said, its leaders no longer bother to hide the core Zionist objective, which is to eliminate the majority of the Palestinian people from the entire land of Palestine and to reserve it almost exclusively for the Jews. The coalition Netanyahu is likely to put together will be even more right-wing than the present one, difficult though that is to believe. In Gaza, Israel has been overseeing what is effectively a slow genocide of the besieged Palestinians in the Strip. This summer's attack was much more horrific than the previous 3 attacks, not only in terms of the scale of the destruction of entire neighborhoods and more than 2,000 Palestinian civilians killed, but also because it came after 3 other attacks after which there has been very, very little reconstruction of Gaza, with hundreds of families without shelter before this summer's attack. And still we see very, very little reconstruction underway. And people have had to try and survive one of the harshest winters in years. Since 2006, the Palestinians of Gaza have been losing access to safe water, sanitation, shelter, medical care, freedom of movement, and increasingly they're losing access to hope, which is the most important element in our survival and struggle for justice. If we move on to Gaza to look at the rest of Palestine, we see that it has been open season on the Palestinian citizens of Israel. I don't know if you took note, but about a few weeks ago, the 50th Palestinian citizen of Israel was killed since the year 2000. And as you know, the number of racist laws against Israel's Palestinian citizens is also on the rise, with growing talk of withdrawal of nationality and expulsion. In the West Bank and East Jerusalem, 50 Palestinians were killed in 2014 alone, and many, many more wounded. Jerusalem is living on a tinderbox. I mean, it could explode at any time, and there's very vicious and violent attacks and some counterattacks as well. And Israel is just fast-tracking its ethnic cleansing program against the Jerusalemite Palestinians through many bureaucratic procedures, like if a Palestinian cannot prove that Jerusalem is the center of their life, even though they are a Jerusalemite, their family has been a Jerusalemite for decades or centuries, they no longer can live in Jerusalem. And of course, we witness the heartbreaking situation of Palestinian refugees, especially the refugees from Syria, but also other Palestinian refugees. And I want to say that beyond the direct suffering that's been imposed by Israel, the Palestinian people are gradually growing increasingly apart, with different narratives taking root in amongst different parts, segments of the Palestinian people because of the geographic separation. And this is awful to say, but there's little knowledge and little love lost now between Gaza and the West Bank. This is one of the biggest challenges I think the Palestinian national movement faces. So today, the Palestinians in each part of Palestine are effectively left to fend for themselves as best they can and in exile, with little or no help from the PLO and PA. Even worse, as you know, the PA has been for years the effective subcontractor for Israel in maintaining security in the West Bank. Among other things, they prevent demonstrations from getting too close to the Israelis. They get lists of suspects from the Israelis of people to arrest, and security and intelligence officials are now getting top jobs in government and the governorates. This has been very well described by my colleagues at Al-Shabaka, Ala Tartir and Sabreen Amro, and I really recommend you read their piece. They also wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, which was published a few months ago on the security sector. We see little sign of a strategy to rebuild the PLO or to end the split between Fatah and Hamas so as to put the work for Palestinian rights back on course. Now, of course, we need to be fair. The PLO has taken several steps that are achievements for Palestinian rights, such as having Palestine recognized as a non-member observer state at the United Nations, and more recently, Palestine's application to join the International Criminal Court, which should go in effect in a couple of weeks on April 1st, and which has already led the court prosecutor to open a preliminary examination into the Gaza conflict. The problem here is that this doesn't appear to be part of a Palestinian strategy, a leadership strategy, to really use international instruments to best effect. For example, Palestinians had a fantastic win with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on the wall in 2004, which was made very little use of by the PLO, despite the fact that it was a major victory. And after Palestine became a non-member observer state at the UN, it joined UNESCO, but did not fully make use of everything that UNESCO had to offer, which actually could have helped the PLO and the PA establish sovereignty. And we're talking sovereignty on land as well as on water. And this is why several Palestinian analysts, myself included, have viewed the ICC move with some skepticism as yet another effort by the PLO, PA to get concessions from Israel at the negotiating table, or actually to get Israel back to the negotiating table with the US. The real tragedy, I feel, is that the Palestinian leadership has been focused on negotiations with Israel without having sufficient power and organization to achieve Palestinian rights. And this has been going on for decades, even before the Oslo Accords. But the Oslo Accords had a much more detrimental effect and made Palestinians dependent on Israel for almost everything, including the tax revenues, which Israel has now withheld. And still the leadership is sticking with it. Even when the leadership takes what seems to be a very brave and definitive decision, such as the PLO Central Council decision at the beginning of this month, to end security cooperation with Israel, it's hard to get excited. Because, first of all, it's simply a recommendation to Mahmoud Abbas. And secondly, it's such a symbol of how far the Palestinian cause has plummeted when you're talking about ending security cooperation, with your occupier. How did we get there? I mean, it's just, it really is a tragic situation. Now, I think it will be very interesting to see if the Israeli elections have the same impact on the PLO-PA that they had on the Palestinian citizens of Israel. The joint list was formed because the racist right-wing Israeli politician Avigdor Lieberman pushed to get the electoral threshold change from 2 to 5% to make it for parties to make it into the Knesset, which would have wiped out all the Arab parties, which was his goal. So the Palestinian parties political parties came together, pushed by that, and had a very, very good result. The threat of losing any voice in the Knesset or any space in the Knesset and being completely at the mercy of the Israeli right helped get their act together. And, you know, as I said, they've strengthened their hand as a result and brought much more exposure to the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel through the election campaign. In fact, I think one of the videos by Ayman Aoudeh, the head of the Joint List, went viral when he was contrasting the Joint List with, it's a very good video if you can get a hold of it, watch it, when he was contrasting the Joint List with all the other Israeli parties. So just as the Joint List had to get its act together, or the Palestinian citizens of Israel had to get their act together, maybe the PLO and PA, now that they have to face Netanyahu again, without hope of rescue from a labor-led government, maybe they'll finally be pushed to patch up the break between Fatah and Hamas. They may also be really pushed to finally end security cooperation with Israel at long last, and to really use these international instruments that they've successfully achieved for the Palestinians. Now, regardless of how things develop with the Palestinian leadership, Palestinian civil society and the international solidarity movement will have to continue to organize, will have to assume that there is a leadership vacuum, and will have to continue to organize around goals and strategies to address the challenges facing the Palestinian people. The good news here is that there are many ways in which Palestinian society is effectively organizing to deal with these challenges, and these areas, I find, are full of hope for the future. On the ground, Israel is strong, very strong, and the Palestinians are unprotected. But, and here's the irony, the stronger Israel is on the ground, the weaker it is internationally. And disastrously for Israel, the very idea of Israel, the notion, the concept that you can have a Jewish state that privileges some of its people at expense of other people, which is racist, really, and which has been at the core of the Zionist enterprise and Israel's foundation, and which has been hidden from Western eyes for decades, is now on full view. This concept is simply not acceptable in the 21st century. We sometimes forget that 1948 was not just the year when Palestine was lost. It was also the year when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted and began to be translated into international law. Now, of course, the law is one thing, and its implementation is another. People have to keep working to get the law applied. It doesn't apply itself. But the law is there, and it's there for us to use. And in fact, one of the challenges for Palestinian civil society is to prevent Israel from doing away with the whole framework of international law altogether, so that it can get away with what it does. For example, it tried to get Western countries to defund the ICC, the International Criminal Court, so that it wouldn't be able to work on Palestine, on the question of Palestine. And I was at a workshop last year that was organized, at which there were several European diplomats, and one European diplomat from, I believe, the Scandinavian countries said to me, or said to the workshop, you know, the reason we support the Palestinians is because it's in our interest to have the law upheld. We want a system based on the rule of law. That's why the rule of law is actually so crucial, is so important. So now, because Israel's open racism and discrimination is shining a sharp spotlight on the racist colonial nature of the Zionist enterprise as a whole, throughout Europe and the United States, unprecedentedly large numbers of civil society activists and even politicians are opposing Israel's behavior and calling into question the Jewish state. This is giving strength to the Palestinian struggle in unexpected ways, and it's bringing new allies into the movement. Even in the US, as a result of the active education campaigns by Palestinians and their allies over years and years, there's been a change in the discourse. And each time Israel has attacked Gaza, the number of supporters of rights for Palestinians has doubled or trebled, grown exponentially. Across university campuses, Students for Justice in Palestine are a real rainbow coalition that include Palestinian, American, Black American, Asians, Latino Americans, you know, and actually I understand that nearly half of the membership is American Jewish. Their number has increased to about 60 universities across the US. The importance of these figures is that students from all these diverse backgrounds are America's future political and economic leaders. That's very important. And, by the way, they all support the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, BDS movement. Perhaps the most unexpected, maybe not that unexpected, but certainly the most welcome new allies are the large and rapidly growing number of Jews who now support Palestinian rights in the US and around the world. They're sickened by the Israeli policies that are so clearly racist and colonialist, and they're outraged that Israel claims to be speaking and acting in the name of Jews. I was just at the Jewish Voice for Peace national meeting this weekend in Baltimore, and it was an incredible outpouring of energy and activism from across the US of not only Jews, the majority were Jews, but I was so surprised to see quite a few Palestinians there, Presbyterians and other Christian denominations. It was like people had poured in, and the energy and the strategic thinking was very, very impressive. JVP and groups like that play a very important role in the movement for human rights in Palestine and Israel. And here's just one reason why. Israel is now exploiting the terrorist attacks in Paris to really drive home the idea that criticism of Israel and its policies equals anti-Semitism. Of course, it has been doing this for years to stop pro-Palestinian groups organizing and to stop BDS actions and to prevent the Palestinian voice from being heard in the public sphere. And it's had some success. Because of its actions, for example, a recent British government report describes the Palestinian call for BDS, for boycott of Israeli academic institutions, as anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic, which is nothing of the sort. In fact, recently, the student associations at UCLA and UC Berkeley adopted resolutions conflating criticism of Israeli policies and anti-Semitism. So after the Paris attacks, Israel is redoubling its efforts to prevent criticism of Israel, to shut down the discourse and the debate. And this is very dangerous to our cause, and it's something we have to organize against. Criticizing Israel's policies does not mean attacking Jews. And one way to easily undermine this argument is to point to the now tens of thousands of Jews, including in JVP, who are working for Palestinian rights and for justice and human rights for all. Not half rights or quarter rights. JVP actually issued a statement recently putting its full weight behind BDS. And that means behind the right of return, in fact. So that is something quite powerful that JVP is doing. I have a sense, I've been touring the States for the last month, and I have a sense that the movement for Palestinian rights has come of age in the US. The collaboration between different organizations now, I don't think we've witnessed it at this level before. There's been collaboration, of course, over the years. But now organizations such as the US Campaign to End the Israeli Occupation, which I'm very proud to have co-founded, and the policy director, Josh Rubner, is here. It now has 400 groups in its coalition. You know, the collaboration between them and Jewish Voice for Peace and Code Pink and American Muslims for Palestine, among others, is really gelling now, and it was seen in the Skip the Speech movement that really took off. And you saw the number as hundreds of thousands of activists and grassroots organizations and many others wrote into their congressional people. You saw the number of people who decided to skip the speech rise from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 and finally to 60 of congressional representatives who decided to skip the speech. Of course, there were other factors as well, but I think the grassroots activism was one of the main factors. Just a few more things to say before closing. BDS, I can see Zaina getting it just a slightly, no, you're not. BDS, so just to turn to BDS for a couple of minutes. It's one of the major sources, I think, of the strength for the movement for Palestinian human rights. And for me, it's a source of pride that Palestinian civil society is capable of that kind of strategic thinking and creativity that led to the BDS call. I'm sure you all know the kind of actions and impact that BDS has had across the world. Driving people to filmmakers, artists, musicians to cancel partnerships, and major companies to cancel contracts or to pull out, and contributing to the fact that some European governments are finally drawing a line between settlement products and Israel. And here's the thing, it's important to remember that BDS is a strategy. It's a tactic. It's a very, very good strategy, a very powerful one, but it is not the goal. There are goals for the Palestinian movement, and what is very important about the BDS call, it is set out those goals. Because for many Palestinians and many in the solidarity movement, we had forgotten what our goals were. Okay, a state, but you know, if we get a state on half of Palestine, does that mean we've succeeded? Should we stop? If we get a, you know, what level of, what are our goals as a Palestinian national movement? These are very clearly set out in the BDS call. How do we express our self-determination? 1, through freedom from occupation. 2, for equality of the citizens of Israel. 3, for justice for the Palestinian refugees. Freedom, justice, equality. Those are the goals of the movement, and it's very important to educate around those goals, because otherwise, if there's another bad deal on the horizon, like Oslo was, you know, people may say, oh, good, you know, they're solving it, I'm going to go home and, you know, plant my garden or whatever, the issue is finished. That happened after Oslo. The international solidarity movement demobilized. But if we are very aware that these are the 3 goals that we're working for, and that we do not stop work until they're achieved, then we carry on. Another area where more work has been needed, and I'm glad to say that some of us are doing this, is enabling Palestinian policy voices to engage in the policy debates in think tanks and academic institutions, especially in the US and Europe. In the US, which is really the biggest battleground for Palestinian rights, Palestinian policy voices are largely missing, or worse, the policy message is distorted, including by Palestinians eager to curry favor with the administration. And that's why a small group of us came together a few years ago, in 2009, to establish Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, which was actually launched in April 2010. As Zaina said, you know, this is a think tank. Al-Shabaka is a think tank without walls or borders. Through it, we seek to turn one of our greatest weaknesses, which is our dispersal all over the world, into a strength, to use electronic tools to bring those voices to strategize and work on policy together. It's about putting a stronger policy voice on the map by tapping Palestinian expertise and experience. We're very happy that Al-Shabaka includes established scholars as well as new emerging voices. Many of the authors of recent pieces of Al-Shabaka have been young analysts, young scholars. We publish everything in English because we want American and European policymakers to understand that we will not accept anything less than our full rights. And we publish everything in Arabic, of course, because it's very important for our own people, for policymakers, the Arab world, to engage, and the Palestinians themselves to engage in strategic development and to promote policies that address the challenges that face us. I want to encourage you all to join the email list at Al-Shabaka if you're not on it already. I believe there's flyers at the door and that have been distributed to you as you came in, so please do. So I've just tried to set out some ideas for discussion. This is a very well-informed group, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Observations about what you have, the way you have evaluated the current state of the support for Palestinian work in this country. I think that there, as someone who was active during the Vietnam period and who was active during the movement to impose sanctions on South Africa during the anti-apartheid struggle, I see a marked difference in the level of activity and in the breadth and depth of the analysis that is given to the American public about the situation with regard to Israel. I think that it's largely confined to educating people about the horrors of the occupation. The omissions which could help to mobilize people are manifold. There's very little knowledge here about the situation of Arabs within the Green Line, within Israel proper. There's next to no knowledge about the fact that it is actually Israel's nuclear armaments that is the driving force behind the nuclear arms race in the Middle East. There's almost no attention given to the fact that Israel has served as a U.S. military proxy in large areas of the world. You could go on and on. Very little of that is raised. The kinds of campaigns that are undertaken are not reaching the masses of people. An example would be that Caterpillar tractors are not an item that the average person can purchase. When you have an effective boycott, you want something that everybody can access easily. It's a common item.
Absolutely.
And there are many that could be that way. And an example, I don't want to take up more time, but an example recently of what I feel is almost, I applaud the rank and file activists in a lot of these organizations. It's the leadership that I truly believe is actually putting the brakes on things.
Okay.
And I just want to give...
maybe take a couple of other questions?
All right, just one more. There was a recent call for demonstration for a shop in Georgetown by the U.S. campaign that was selling Sabre products. Those products have been sold for years by the major supermarkets like Safeway. Why isn't there a major campaign there? It's just, we're being fooled. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take maybe a couple of questions over there and then... Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah.
We had one over here.
And then work back.
Hi, Nadia. Thank you so much for your talk. It's a pleasure to hear you speak as well as get to know you. I had a question about the youth movement and the role of youth in the Palestine-Israel conflict and bringing out in Palestinian activism in general. Students for Justice in Palestine has mobilized in many, many ways, and they've been great about connecting to each other, connecting to organizations, and I think that the youth at that level can have a great impact, not just for their own generations, but above. And I just want to get your opinions about how that can help in the movement for freedom for Palestine, and what you've seen, not just within the U.S., but outside as well, with what youth are doing.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a couple more.
Thank you. Thank you again for the excellent talk. Slightly outside your focus, but maybe it's related. Is there a possibility, since it's been pointed out many times, the support of the American government of Israel is a crucial thing? Is it possible that the significant differences
regarding the Iran negotiations might play a role in ending the 100% support of the U.S. government for Israeli policies? One more. Okay, yeah.
And then
Okay.
Hello. I'm just hoping you can connect some of the first half of your talk about the vacuum created without a Palestinian national movement, without a strong PLO, and its effect on solidarity. What gaps you see, what consequences you feel are visible amongst solidarity, where it orients itself, what its priorities are, and any prescriptions you have for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, these are all great questions and comments. I'll start with your comments. What you say is absolutely true. But you also have to look at where we started, where we're coming from, the resources we had to work with, and the nature of the enemy, for example, when the U.S. campaign was co-founded, we were very, very clear that we not only had to educate, we had to to uneducate. You know, the prevailing belief in this country was that Israel was a great thing and a really good thing, and to try and unpack that and explain and so on. And there has been, I mean, given where we started, it was not as simple as, for example, anti-apartheid, which is very, very clear black and white issue. You know, here it's really caught up with guilt and, you know, enormous organizing and activism on the part of the pro-Israel and Zionist groups in the country. The absence of Arab and Palestinian organizing. So there are many factors. So if you look at where the movement has come from, I know I'm very optimistic. I mean, given what we've been working with and the resources we've had, I think we've moved. I think we've moved a very long way. We can agree to disagree. For example, thanks. I mean, I think you made your point very, very effectively. You know, when you get the shift in the Presbyterian Church, the decision to divest took 12 years to achieve. Very, very hard work on the part of a number of groups, including Jewish Voice for Peace, as it happens, and very, very active Presbyterians worked very hard to get that. That's a major shift. The United Methodists also took similar decisions. Again, that took 12 to 14 years. So I think the bar was far higher than these other movements. We're not where we need to be, absolutely not. But I think we've come a long way. The youth movement and the role of youth. By the way, just to get back to the issue of the Palestinians and the Green Line, I think we're going to be hearing much, much more about them and from them now, thanks to the joint list and the consciousness it's raised. The SJPs, I think, are doing fantastic work. What's different about the SJPs today and the effort to set up SJPs 10, 12 years ago, you know, there were SJPs 10, 12 years ago, and they faded away. What's different today is they're there, and they've been there, and they've been holding national conferences every year for the last, I think, I want to say 5, 6 years. And they're forming something of an institutional memory, which they didn't have. So I think that's very, very helpful. And then they grow. So one of the good things about youth organizing is that if youth move on, and so that organizing may be impacted or affected if you get leaders who are really effective, youth leaders really effective who move on. But the other thing is they move on and become part of society, and they organize in the society that they are. They're leaders. So I think it's very important for the movement. I think they're also beginning to coalesce and collaborate with some of the other major national organizations, which we didn't used to see some of that happening before. So that's very good. The differences around Iran, that's huge. I mean, that contributed, I think, in great part to the success or the numbers of congressional representatives who skipped the speech. You know, American interest has been pitted openly against Israeli interest for the first time now. You know, I think it can only get better from here because if they, I don't know if Netanyahu shot his bolt in the speech in Congress, or how he's going to continue to fight against the U.S. national interest, but it could get really ugly, and it could create major opportunities for our movement. And the impact of the vacuum of the of the PLO on the, you know, it's a major impact. I mean, with the anti-apartheid movement, you had a leadership that was saying where they wanted to go, what they wanted to do, and giving advice and being there as the Northern Star. We have to take, you know, kind of abstract goals as our Northern Star, like the 3 goals in the BDS goal. That's why I emphasize them, because that's the leadership for us. You know, as we organize, this is what we're working towards. That's how we can move ahead. So, you know, no, it does have a huge impact. And sometimes, you know, the leadership will work against Palestinian interests. I mean, for example, with the security coordination, that's bad. You don't know what the Palestinian state is, how it's going to be used. You have no idea of what's going on with the negotiations, what kind of deal will, all of that has an impact. So this movement has a much bigger a job to do than other movements in terms of being able to work leaderless, and has managed to get this far. I think, despite that, despite that being in the way, I think it may get something Netanyahu has saved us from is what happens to the solidarity movement if we have a position where Palestinians are speaking out directly against, let's say, Abbas or the PLO, and saying this deal does not represent us, and calling on the international solidarity movement to do that. There would be a huge split at that time, which would gravely weaken the movement. Luckily, I don't think we have to face that anytime soon. I think there will be a regrouping. Yeah. So I think there's a question.
Thank you very much. This is a question and comment that I've asked at forums here a number of times, and it has to do with the role of the churches and the moral and ethical power they can bring to this. Now, I felt that this is an area where the movement, however you want to describe it, has not really put much or sufficient focus on. You mentioned the Presbyterians, the Methodists, and there is the Kairos movement, the issue of also Sabeel and so on. But it seems to me that, especially given the outlook of the current Pope, the importance of the evangelical community in this country, and attitudes, that much more effort really should be put in this area. Could you comment on that?
Okay.
And including bringing to people's attention the situation of Christians in Israel.
I think Ellen has a... There's another question here from... Oh, do I answer that? Okay, so I'll go ahead and answer that. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it's taken a very long while for those who are active in the churches to move within them. Like I said, to get the Presbyterian and Methodist decision. But when you get a decision like that, you have to do an enormous amount of educating and lobbying to change minds and hearts to get there. The Presbyterians are moving in an interesting direction now, or some of them, the ones who are pushing for this issue, is just to tackle the issue at its roots by questioning Zionism and the role of Zionism and the purpose of Zionism, and have issued a study guide, on Zionism. So they're, which I recommend, to everyone. So I think people are working at it. I just think there was so many areas to work in with so few resources that we're moving much more slowly, or the movement is moving much more slowly than anyone would like. I mean, when I think back to we established the U.S. campaign with $0. $0. The first grant to the U.S. campaign, I mean, it was all volunteer work. The first grant was $20,000, and then only after a couple of years was it possible to get enough money to have offices, to have a couple of staff, we're talking peanuts here. With these peanuts now, the U.S. campaign, I'm just giving a sense of growth. I would say, well, I don't know. I mean, it would go the leap in the budget would be exponential, something n to the power trillion or something, to go from $20,000 to I don't know, maybe close to $750,000 today. I mean, it's quite a, but it took, again, about 13 years to get there. So I think it's really really slow. There is a group of Palestinians that have come together, Palestinian Christians that have come together in the States to set up a Palestinian Christian group here, which is Palestinian Christians Against, or Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace. Very well named, so they're not really against, they're for. You know, to make sure there's a Palestinian Christian voice in that work. You know, Sabil is doing quite a bit of work, but more needs to be done. Yeah. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I mean, you know, and more needs to be done, and more power to those who are doing it.
We have a few more questions. I think we'll start with Ellen, but we need the microphone, and I got one from
Tweets. Okay.
Thank you, Nadia. It's always wonderful to hear you speak.
Oh, thanks, Ellen.
You've been around for a long time. It's very good. I think we lack the media attention regarding the Palestinians, that we need more. We need some attention paid vis-a-vis the media. We have very little coverage of any aspect of the Palestinian issue except when there's some horrible war in Gaza. You talked about the role of civil society. I just want to ask you about the Jewish-Israeli movement, such as Zucrot, these people that are working for the Palestinians.
Yeah, sure.
This is from Twitter. How can we in the movement be more self-critical, adjusting strategies to reflection while still sticking to our goals?
Yeah, those are great questions. Ellen, it's always great to see you again. And, you know, again, I mean, the reason I'm able to do this work at all is because I stay optimistic. I'm not naive, I'm not stupid, but I stay optimistic because I see where we've come from. I don't see that AIPAC's budget is like, you know, 100-fold, let's say, Jewish Voice for Peace. I see that Jewish Voice for Peace has a budget that's, you know, treble what they used to have, double what they used to have last year, or you know, quadruple what they had a few years ago, whatever. So you have to do that to be able to do the work. I mean, I pass this on as a piece of advice for anyone who wants to be in activism. You can't do it if you're optimistic. Otherwise, you'll think you're crazy to be taking on, you know, a nuclear-armed country that's you know, backed by one of the biggest superpowers in the world. I say this with regard to the media. Where we were on the media was like way below zero. I mean, there's so much more on Palestinians in the media now, so many more Palestinian voices, so many more op-eds, so many more supporters of Palestinians articulating. And it's, I mean, saying things that are accepted, things that would have been considered completely out of bounds 3-4 years ago, that are now, oh yeah, accepted. There's been a shift in the discourse. This doesn't come from nothing. It's come because a group was formed and organized to specifically focus on that issue called the Institute for Middle East Understanding. And they're doing a fabulous job in this respect. You know, again, they were established, I want to say maybe 8-9 years ago. Got a few people in their house, raised a few bucks, you know, somebody volunteered part-time. And now, 10 years on, I think they maybe have 10, 12 staff around in Palestine and the U.S. I mean, and you can see, I think their last email I got from them was they placed a media piece at least once a day, you know, every day of the year on Palestine and Palestinians. I mean, they work there, and they work at the regional, national, regional, and local level. So, no, we're not where we need to be or where we should be, but yes, we've come a very long way than where we were. Zucrot, I have the highest respect for Zucrot, for breaking the silence, for other Israeli Jewish groups, for the pilots, refusers, you know, the pilots who refuse to serve. And they suffer too. I mean, they get kicked out, they lose their jobs, they It's one thing that's fascinating for me as an indicator is that the right of return was discussed at JVP national meeting this last weekend. Discussed in several different panels and fora. How would it look? How would it be possible? This goes straight to the heart of the Palestinian cause. You know, because as I keep saying, even if not one Palestinian, you know, let's say not one Palestinian returns home, and let's say that Gaza and the West Bank are suddenly freed, the presence of Palestinian citizens in Israel, you know, already challenges the Zionist concept, the notion of a Jewish state. They have to deal with it. They have to be equal citizens. Well, imagine then the right of return and how we deal with that. So I mean, the fact that it's being discussed by, you know, 600 plus people, the vast majority of whom are Jews, you know, at a national meeting, and they'll go back to their chapters. It's fantastic. And they're supporting with others a tour in the US of Zukhrot and Badil. So I think that's really key for people to hear those voices, to get them out. And the question is, how can we be self-critical and adjust our strategies and move on? Is a great question. It's very hard to do without a leadership. That gets back to the leadership question. You know, the movement in the States does not represent the entirety of the Palestinian people. I mean, and it's a very mixed movement, thank God, you know, of Palestinians and Jews and African Americans and, you know, others. But you know, for the Palestinian people as a whole, who evaluates those strategies, who says no, now we need to go, and so on. You know, it's hard. So all we can do is work on our piece, the piece of it that we control, and keep the three goals, you know, in our line of sight, and carry on. That's what we have to deal with. Thank you.
Allison? Okay. Let's take both.
Let's take maybe all three and then stop there. There's three, I think.
There's three.
Let's take all three and then stop. Yeah.
Often people I talk with here in Washington say that they have either read or heard that there's great dissatisfaction with the PA, the PLO, Fatah, Hamas, and so forth, and they often wonder, is there any evidence that there's a new political movement or party emerging, you know, in Palestine, and if so, does the diaspora have any connection to it and trying to support and strengthen it? And they often also ask, you know, when was the last national election held and why has it been so long?
Mm-hmm.
The other questions were, we'll start with you, Allison.
Thank you, Nadia. And as a member of the DC chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, I just want to say that we were pleased and honored to have you at our conference of 600.
It was my honor.
This weekend. You mentioning the ICC and the PA's attempt to access intergovernmental organizations or international bodies like that, and its failure to integrate that into an actual strategy. I know you don't have a lot of time, but could you raise some points about how that could be done strategically, and in the absence of such a strategy, how can we in the solidarity movement, this sort of dovetails on Sasha's question, support that type of strategy regarding those bodies?
Yeah, following up on this question about a new group within the Palestinian movement, is the Islamic State making any headway into inroads into the West Bank and Gaza or the refugee camps?
Okay.
Did you want to ask more? Okay, why don't you go ahead and ask one more, and I think that'll be it because we need to give you time to do the answers.
I'm just wondering if you could place for us what the role of Palestinian Americans and Palestinian American communities is in the work of solidarity. Rasmia Oda, her case, where that sits with everything that you've discussed.
Okay, these are great questions, a great engaged group. So, yeah, I wasn't sure when you began to speak where they were saying there was great satisfaction or great dissatisfaction with then I figured it out. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a new political party emerging, at least that meets the eye. The Palestinian youth in the West Bank and Gaza tried to get organized and got organized after the so-called Arab Spring, short-lived Arab uprisings, but nothing's really come of that. You know, and many people say that if only Marwan Barghouti could be freed, you know, he would be a leader. I think the reality is that anybody who emerges or tries to be a leader, as someone told me, the game is so dirty. He said, I knew it was, this is before he went back and started living there, I knew it was going to be dirty, but I had no idea it was going to be so dirty. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that anybody who emerges as a leader or is freed from jail as a leader is going to have to make a lot of compromises. So the role of Palestinian civil society and the international solidarity movement, you know, will have to be there. And elections are not a panacea. You know, there were elections. Now, if there are elections now, Palestinians in Jerusalem won't be able to vote. You know, Israel will allow votes whenever, wherever, or whenever it wants. And, you know, it can shut down the Palestinian Legislative Council whenever it wants. I mean, I think really one of the disasters to hit the Palestinian people is, you know, we had the state before we achieved liberation. You know, talk about cart before the horse. So I don't think elections are a solution to the issue here. Local elections, you know, sure. Municipal elections, sure. Ideally, the Palestinian Authority should be a local governing body, not pretend to be a national one. But that's where we're at. We have a major paper coming out on the ICC and how the PLO can use it. So I encourage you in a couple of weeks' time to check out, to check Al-Shabaka for that. You know, it's the most effective way to make use of the ICC would be on settlements. In fact, you know, if one had a dream, maybe one could have civil society organizations doing a lot of work on settlements, with Congress here and, you know, the ICC working on settlements. The ICC, if it works on Gaza, I don't want to say it could backfire, but, you know, one thing I've heard is the most likely case that will be raised is against Hamas, you know, so that may be the outcome of the Palestinian application to the ICC. But, you know, by focusing on settlements, I think there would be much more solid ground. So the Islamic State, as far as I can tell, I mean, you know, is not making much headway in, you know, there are constant noises and threats and so on, but not making much headway in the occupied territories. And Hamas is now saying, hey, man, look at, I'm your, you know, bulwark against the Islamic State. So, yeah. And the Palestinian American role in the movement, I don't know, you know, what would you say, Zaina? I mean, Palestinian Americans have tried to form bodies and organizations. There have been two. One is the U.S.-Palestinian USPCN coordinating network or committee? Committee, yeah, okay. USPCN network, something network. I mean, it's there, but I'm not sure how far it's gone. And the other one is there's another group. Well, there's also Al-Ghawda was formed at one point. Again, I'm not sure how active that is. The problem is, you know, when you try to form a Palestinian bodies, obviously politics gets in the way. Fatah members come in and try and direct it, or Hamas members try and direct it. I personally am happy to see Palestinians being active in broader Palestinian Americans being active in broader solidarity movements. I think Palestinian Americans are giving a lot of leadership to the SJPs. But because they're in the SJPs, you know, there's no danger of them being like co-opted or dragged away or what have you. And the case of Rasmea Aoudeh has certainly galvanized people, a lot of people all over the US, but not just Palestinians. You know, it's just so unjust and so awful, you know. But again, a small bright spot on the horizon, which of course should be bigger, but at least it's there, is that, you know, there's a lot of these legal cases because, you know, if you can afford a lot of money, you can sue. So, I mean, the case that was found where the PLO and PA were found, you know, guilty and having to make reparations for victims of terrorism just a few weeks ago. This case against the Arab Bank on the same grounds. Cases against individuals like Rasmea Aoudeh and others, largely in Chicago. But, you know, in terms of legal protection for students active on campus, at least there's now something called Student Legal Strategies for Students or something. Anyway, there's a group, what? Palestinian, sorry, what is it?
Palestinian Solidarity.
Thank you. Palestinian Solidarity Legal Support. I get myself lost in a maze of acronyms. I always say that acronyms alienate, you know. Why can't people find a name that's sort of catchy and stick to it? Palestine Solidarity Legal Support. Anyway, it's great that we have that. And again, it was a small effort by, I think, a couple of individual activists to get it to happen, to get it to be hosted, and is now an organization able to have a couple of staff and to raise money to get more staff and to support people. So again, we're not where we want to be, but we're certainly much further ahead than we ever have been.